In 1985, on the rooftop of a high school in Nagoya, a girl gathered all her courage and confessed her feelings to a classmate. The answer she received was a gentle shake of his head. Holding back tears, she lowered her gaze and walked away. The boy, meanwhile, assumed it was nothing more than a fleeting memory from their school days. But he was wrong. 14 years later, his wife was stabbed to death inside their apartment, and their 2-year-old son witnessed the entire crime. The killer vanished without a trace. Police launched an enormous manhunt. A total of 101,000 investigators took part in the case. 5,217 witness statements were collected. 3,800 suspects were screened. All of it led nowhere. The case quickly became one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in the history of Japanese criminal investigations. But the husband never gave up. He spent 22 million yen, equivalent to more than 145,000 US dollars, solely to preserve the crime scene. Every single month, he returned to the apartment where his wife was murdered to replace the moisture-absorbing packets, carefully preserving every blood stain and every footprint left behind by the killer. That empty room was no longer just a crime scene. It became an obsession, a physical embodiment of his long, relentless wait for justice. Then, on October 31st, 2025, just a little over a month ago, Satoru Takaba, now 69 years old, received a call from the police. The final DNA match had been made. 26 years of waiting had not been in vain. When the murder happened, he was still a middle-aged man with jet black hair. Now, gray streaks lined both of his temples. Only the hand gripping his keychain remained as steady as ever. So what exactly happened inside apartment 302 on that fateful day? Who was the killer? And what drove them to commit such brutal violence against a devoted young mother? And did that rejected confession back in 1985 have anything to do with the tragedy that followed? It all began on one fateful Saturday afternoon in 1999. No one knows what desperate struggles unfolded inside apartment 302, and no one could have imagined that this case would later become a textbook example in the history of Japanese criminal investigations for evidence preservation and forensic reconstruction. At the time, the Dosante residential complex in Nishi, Nagoya was a quiet, ordinary neighborhood. Most of the buildings were aging 5 to 6-story apartment blocks, home primarily to working-class families. The Takaba family lived in apartment 302 on the west side of the 3rd floor. The room didn't receive ideal natural light, but from the window one could still faintly admire the distant silhouette of Nagoya Castle. At approximately 2:07 p.m. on October 13th, Tanaka Kenichi, the landlord, arrived carrying a jar of homemade persimmon jam. He had come to thank Namiko for accepting an important delivery on his behalf the day before. When he reached the door of apartment 302, Tanaka noticed that it was not fully closed, and a faint metallic odor lingered in the air. The smell of blood suddenly hit his nose. He called out several times, but there was no response. He gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The horrific scene that unfolded before Tanaka's eyes sent a chill straight down his spine. Namiko lay motionless in a pool of blood in the hallway. 2-year-old Kohei sat beside her, his clothes soaked in blood, still clutching his toy car and innocently, unconsciously patting his mother's body. Tanaka was so terrified that his legs nearly gave out beneath him. He had to brace himself against the wall just to pull out his phone. His hands shook uncontrollably. He dialed the wrong number 3 times before he finally managed to reach the police. About 20 minutes later, a team of 58 officers from the Aichi Prefectural Police, equipped with what were then the most advanced investigative tools available, arrived at the scene. The entire area was immediately placed under full lockdown, divided into a primary crime scene and an outer security perimeter, with all unauthorized access strictly prohibited. Preliminary forensic findings indicated that Namiko had died approximately 2 to 3 hours earlier, with fatal stab wounds to the neck and chest. The victim, Namiko Takaba, died from massive blood loss caused by injuries inflicted by a sharp object. At the scene, investigators discovered several very distinct shoe prints near the entrance. The prints matched women's athletic shoes, size 24 centimeters, equivalent to about a U.S. women's size 7. a limited edition sneaker model from South Korea that was extremely rare in Japan at the time. On the floor near the entryway, there were several small traces of blood leading deeper into the apartment. In the bathroom, a small amount of blood residue remained in the sink, not fully washed away. Forensic analysis determined that all of these blood traces belonged to blood type B, which did not match the victim Namiko's blood type A. In 1999, due to technical limitations, police were only able to identify blood types and could not yet extract DNA. Based on this, investigators concluded that the killer had likely injured themselves during the attack and then went to the bathroom to clean the wound. On the dining table, officers also found a half-finished bottle of yogurt drink. 3 complete fingerprints were lifted from the outside of the bottle. After comparison, none of them matched any member of the Takaba family. When he received the call from police, the victim's husband, Satoru Takaba, immediately jumped into a taxi at his workplace and rushed home, his heart racing with dread. The moment he pushed the door open and stepped inside, his legs suddenly gave way beneath him. He had to be supported by officers just to remain standing. When he saw his wife's body and his small son covered in blood, the man who had always been so composed completely collapsed. He broke down in sobs, repeatedly murmuring through tears, "She was fine this morning. She was fine this morning." Satoru told investigators that around 8 a.m. that morning, he had left for work to handle an urgent matter at his company. His wife, Namiko, saw him out and told him that their son had a slight fever. She said she would take him to the hospital for a checkup and reminded her husband to come home early that evening. That was the final conversation the couple ever had. No one could have imagined it would become their last farewell. Based on the testimony of 23 witnesses, phone call records, and store purchase receipts, police were able to reconstruct a highly detailed and complete timeline of the day the murder occurred. After Satoru left the apartment, Namiko called the community clinic to ask for advice on how to care for a child with a mild fever. Her voice sounded calm and gentle, with no signs of distress or anything unusual. At 9:03 a.m., she then contacted the childcare support center Mama no Tomo to reserve a ride for 3 p.m., preparing to take her son to the pediatric hospital for an examination. By 9:35 a.m., Machimoto Akira, a delivery driver for Yamato Transport, a widely used courier service in Japan, arrived at apartment 302 to deliver powdered milk and diapers. He rang the doorbell 3 times and called out, but no one answered. Assuming no one was home, he slipped a delivery notice into the door slot. The notice slip clearly recorded his signature and the delivery time. At 10:12 a.m. and again at 10:40 a.m., the childcare support center placed 2 phone calls to Namiko. The first call was to confirm the type of vehicle, and the second was to provide the driver's name and contact information. However, no one answered either call. The staff felt slightly concerned, but assumed that Namiko might be putting her child down for a nap, so they did not attempt to call again. At around 11 a.m., Sato Toko, a nearby neighbor, went downstairs to take out the trash and saw Namiko carrying little Kohei out of the building, heading in the direction of the clinic. The two exchanged greetings, and Namiko explained that her son's fever had not yet gone down, so she wanted to take him to the clinic for peace of mind. From 11:10 a.m. to 11:40 a.m., Namiko took Kohei to Ogawa Pediatric Clinic for an examination. Kohei was diagnosed with a viral flu and was prescribed a fever-reducing medication for children. A nurse at the clinic later recalled that Namiko was a very cautious mother. She asked many detailed questions about home care and carefully wrote everything down in a small notebook. At 11:42 a.m., the clinic's surveillance camera recorded Namiko carrying her son as she walked back in the direction of the apartment complex. Between approximately 11:55 a.m. and 12:05 p.m., Namiko returned to the residential complex. The owner of the convenience shop beneath the building stated that Namiko purchased a bottle of mineral water and a pack of wet wipes for 180 yen. She also asked the shop owner to briefly watch little Kohei while she walked over to the nearby vending machine to buy a can of hot milk. Both the store's receipt and the vending machine's transaction log confirmed this time frame. At around 12:15 p.m., Sato Toko, the neighbor in apartment 301, was chopping vegetables in her kitchen when she suddenly heard a loud thud from the adjacent apartment, like the sound of a chair falling to the floor. This was immediately followed by a short, piercing scream from a woman, lasting only 1 or 2 seconds before falling completely silent. At the time, Sato assumed it was just children knocking something over and did not think much of it. However, this brief window of time later matched almost exactly with the estimated time of death, determined by forensic investigators. At around 12:40 p.m., Iguchi, a resident living on the 3rd floor, saw a woman wearing a dark-colored coat hurriedly running down the staircase while gripping her right wrist tightly with her left hand. At the same time, Yamashita Ryosuke, a taxi driver who had just gotten off his shift and was returning home, also noticed this woman at the entrance of the apartment complex. He described her as being around 40 years old, wearing a dark gray coat and black pants, keeping her head down and walking very quickly. Her right hand was tightly gripping her left wrist, and a red liquid was dripping from her wrist, appearing to be blood. Yamashita kindly asked whether she needed help, but the woman did not respond. Instead, she quickened her pace toward the nearby bus stop. Yamashita provided a detailed description of her height, build, and footwear. These descriptions later became a core foundation for the police sketch of the suspect. After that, no one else noticed anything unusual, until the landlord, Tanaka Kenichi, discovered the crime scene and called the police. At the ground level beneath the apartment building, police measured and collected droplets of type B blood on the pavement. More importantly, the soil attached to the shoe prints recovered at the crime scene became a central clue in tracing the suspect's escape route. Analysis showed that the soil contained components originating from a park near the Dosente area. Based on this, investigators concluded that the mud on the suspect's shoe soles had likely been picked up before the person entered the apartment. This park was located only about 800 meters, roughly half a mile, away from the apartment, and it contained a public restroom, making it a highly plausible location for the killer to clean their wound in an emergency. As expected, police later discovered type B blood, matching the blood found at the crime scene, in the sink of the public restroom on the east side of the park. Outside the restroom, along a gravel path, investigators also recovered shoe prints with tread patterns similar to those found at the apartment. However, in 1999, surveillance camera coverage in this area was below 30%. The west side of the park connected to multiple narrow alleys without street signage. After tending to the wound, the suspect could have merged into the crowded commercial district where no cameras were present, or boarded an unregistered form of transportation. Ultimately, police lost the suspect's trail at an intersection on the west side of the park. At 8 p.m. on the night of the murder, the Aichi Prefectural Police mobilized 50 veteran criminal investigators to form a dedicated task force that operated around the clock. Their top priority was to build a suspect profile and determine investigative direction based on physical evidence and eyewitness testimony. The investigation first focused on the victim's inner circle. As the husband, Satoru Takaba was the first person questioned. Police conducted a thorough review of his employment, financial status, social relationships, and movements on the day of the murder. The results confirmed that he had a solid alibi. Neighbors and relatives consistently testified that the couple had a loving relationship with no history of serious arguments and no signs of divorce or infidelity. As a result, Satoru Takaba was formally cleared as a suspect. However, Satoru had previously been in a brief marriage. His ex-wife was named Yamaguchi Yukiko. The two had divorced due to incompatible personalities, and disputes had arisen during their asset division. At the time, Yukiko had even publicly declared that she would not let Satoru live in peace, giving her a potential motive. But after investigation, police confirmed that on the day of the murder, she was on a business trip in Gifu Prefecture, making it impossible for her to have committed the crime. Next, police investigated the Mama no Tomo child care support center that Namiko participated in. The center had 23 regular members who were in frequent contact with her. Among them, 5 individuals had previously had minor disagreements with Namiko over child-rearing philosophies. These 5 became primary subjects of police scrutiny, but all were ultimately ruled out as suspects. After that, police systematically screened 10 households near apartment 302, 43 individuals in the community who had interacted with Namiko, and 32 co-workers and clients from the trading company where Namiko had worked prior to marrying. After eliminating each group one by one, no anomalies were discovered. The investigation entered a deadlock. By the year 2000, efforts to trace the victims' social connections had stalled. The task force shifted its focus to three crucial pieces of physical evidence: the Korean women's sneakers found at the scene, the yogurt drink bottle, and the type B blood. This shift in investigative direction briefly rekindled hope. In particular, the limited edition Korean women's sneakers were believed to be the most promising potential breakthrough. Police contacted the brand's Japanese distributor and obtained sales records within Japan. A total of 302 pairs had been sold nationwide, 17 of them in the Nagoya area. Police contacted each of the 17 buyers on the sales list, verifying their identities, their whereabouts on the day of the murder, as well as their shoe sizes and physical characteristics. The results showed that 12 individuals had clear alibis, 3 had emigrated overseas and were confirmed to be abroad at the time of the murder, and the remaining 2, although lacking definitive alibis, did not match the shoe size. In the end, all 17 individuals were eliminated as suspects. The case once again appeared to have reached a dead end. In the fall of 2001, little Kohei had just turned 4 years old. During a kindergarten art class with the theme, My Family, he suddenly said to his teacher, "Mom was pushed down by the clerk at the convenience store. Her hand was bleeding." This vague statement was recorded in his child's psychological counseling file. However, at the time, police believed that the identity of the so-called convenience store clerk was unclear and that young children's memories were easily distorted. As a result, they did not pursue it further and merely archived it as a supplementary clue. No one could have imagined that this would become the key to solving the mystery 24 years later. On October 18, 1999, Namiko's funeral was held at a funeral home in Nagoya City. Hundreds of neighborhood residents, Satoru's co-workers, and members of the Mama no Tomo group came to pay their respects. At the service, little Kohei was held in his grandmother's arms, gazing innocently at the crowd, unaware that he had lost his mother forever. Standing before the casket, Satoru held a photograph of Namiko that had been cut from their family portrait and said through choking sobs, "I swear I will find the murderer and avenge you." That sentence became both his lifelong obsession and his sole purpose for the next 26 years. After the funeral, Satoru made a decision that shocked both family and friends. He moved his son to live with his own mother, but continued renting apartment 302 for 60,000 yen per month. He also demanded that nothing inside the apartment be touched at all. In his official police statement, he wrote, "There must be clues at the scene. I cannot allow them to disappear." Satoru's decision received full support from the Special Investigation Unit. Miyamoto Shoji, who was the head of the task force at the time, personally met with Satoru and carefully explained the importance of preserving the crime scene. He emphasized that blood stains, shoe prints at the entrance, and even trace elements in the air could one day become the key to solving the case. The police would provide technical support and personally instruct him on how to protect the scene. Forensic technicians specifically designed a customized preservation plan for apartment 302. A special transparent protective film was applied over the shoe prints at the entrance. This film was water-resistant, dust-resistant, and oxidation-resistant. The remaining bloodstains in the bathroom were covered with aluminum foil to prevent sunlight from degrading the DNA. 10 dehumidifiers were installed inside the apartment to maintain the humidity at approximately 50%, preventing mold growth from damaging the evidence. Satoru was required to replace the moisture-absorbing materials every month, and every 3 months, forensic specialists would return to inspect the condition of the apartment. Satoru followed this plan with absolute discipline. On the 10th of every month, without fail, he would arrive at apartment 302 on time. He would open the windows for 30 minutes to ventilate the room, then replace the filters and desiccants in the machines. Using a soft brush, he would gently sweep dust off the protective film, then checked the humidity with a hygrometer to ensure it met the required standard. He never stayed inside the apartment for long. Every visit was brief. Because with each moment spent inside that room, he felt as if he were being dragged back to the day of the murder itself, overwhelmed by unbearable pain. In March 2002, the Forensic Science Division used a newly imported fluorescent blood detection reagent to re-examine the crime scene. Inside the narrow gaps between the floorboards at the apartment entrance, investigators discovered a significant amount of blood in microscopic droplets, no larger than the tip of a needle that had previously gone unnoticed. After testing, this blood was also confirmed to be type B, matching the blood collected in 1999 and providing further crucial forensic evidence. In addition to preserving the crime scene, Satoru carefully organized all of Namiko's personal belongings, from her diaries and letters to her phone address book, hoping to find any clue that might point to the killer. However, her diary contained only records of ordinary family life, with no mention of conflicts or disputes with anyone. Beginning in 2000, on October 13th of every year, Satoru and his son Kohei distributed flyers about the case at Nagoya's busiest commercial districts. The design of the flyer was simple: Namiko's photo and basic case information on the front, and the reward amount with a police tip line number on the back. The reward was initially 1 million yen, and by 2020, police increased it to 3 million yen. In the early years, when Kohei was still small, Satoru placed him in a stroller and pushed it while handing out flyers. When people were willing to stop and listen, he would carefully explain the details of the case and earnestly plead for any information. When people declined, he would simply bow in thanks without ever complaining. As time passed, the size of the task force slowly shrank, from 50 officers to 10, and eventually to only 3 veteran detectives who continued to follow the case. The murder officially became a cold case. One day in 2004, while organizing investigative documents provided by police, Satoru happened to come across a clause in Japan's Criminal Procedure Code stating that the statute of limitations for murder was 15 years. By then, 5 years had already passed since the crime. If the case was not solved before 2014, the killer would escape legal responsibility forever. The realization sent a chill through him. He immediately contacted the families of victims from other unsolved cases, and together they joined a civil organization called Usushio, meaning the undertow, small but persistent, capable of building great force. They began a widespread public campaign to abolish the statute of limitations for murder cases. Over the next 6 years, Satoru traveled back and forth between Nagoya and Tokyo dozens of times, attended 17 parliamentary hearings, and personally gathered more than 80,000 signatures on the streets. In June 2010, the Japanese National Diet finally passed an amendment to the Criminal Code, officially abolishing the statute of limitations for murder. The moment he received the news, Satoru took Kohei, who had just started junior high school, into apartment 302. He pointed at the wall calendar, still frozen at October 1999, and said, "Now we have our entire lifetime to wait for the truth." On October 13th, 2014, Nagoya was hit by its first snowfall of the season. Kohei was now 17 years old, a high school student. He stood beside his father handing out flyers in Nagoya Plaza. His fingers were red from the cold, yet he continued to bow earnestly to passers-by and say, "Please take a look. Help us find the person who killed my mother." It was a sentence he had first begun saying at 5 years old, and had repeated for 12 long years. An elderly woman passing by was moved to tears when she saw the father and son. She pressed a hand warmer into Kohei's palm. That night, Kohei wrote in his diary, "Dad says Mom is watching us from the sky. We cannot give up." Throughout Kohei's upbringing, the absence of his mother remained the greatest loss of his life. His entire understanding of who she was came solely from his father's stories and the photographs kept in their home. In 2025, during an interview with Asahi Shimbun, Kohei said, "When I was little, when people asked where my mother was, I always said she had gone very far away and would come back once I grew up. Only later did I understand that she would never come back. In 2024, when Kohei was 27, he got married. On his wedding day, he placed a photograph of his mother in the waiting room. Beside the photo stood a jar of cherry blossom jam, Namiko's favorite treat when she was alive. He wanted her to be there in spirit, and he wanted her to know that he and his father had never given up searching for her killer. By the end of 2024, the total rent that Satoru had paid for apartment 302 had reached 22.8 million yen, an amount equivalent to his entire 15 years of income before retirement. And yet, he believed every yen was worth it, as long as it meant one day catching the killer and giving his beloved wife an answer. At the end of 2024, the Aichi Prefectural Police launched a cold case reinvestigation program, allocating special funding to acquire a nanoscale DNA analysis system. This new technology was 1,000 times more sensitive than previous methods, capable of extracting complete genetic data even from severely degraded samples. During the reopening briefing, Saiki Riko, a young female officer assigned to organize old case files, accidentally came across Kohei's childhood statement. Mom was pushed down by the convenience store clerk. Her hand was bleeding. Combined with the discovery of food packaging fibers commonly found around convenience stores embedded in the soil stuck to the shoe prints at the crime scene, veteran detective Sontai Suke suddenly slammed his hand on the table and said, "We've always focused on Namiko's social connections, but what if we overlooked Satoru's side of the story? That convenience store clerk may have been targeting Satoru from the very beginning." This suspicion completely altered the direction of the investigation. Police shifted their focus from Namiko's relationships to Satoru's personal history, paying special attention to individuals connected to past romantic entanglements and suspicious behavior following the murder. Investigators re-examined Satoru's life in detail. A breakthrough came from a high school reunion guest book dated October 25, 1998. One name stood out: Kumiko Yasufuku. In the message section, she had written, "Seeing Satoru again. It felt just like yesterday." Records confirmed that Kumiko Yasufuku had been Satoru's high school classmate. In 1985, she had publicly confessed her feelings to him on the school rooftop, but had been rejected. At the reunion, Satoru had smiled and proudly shown photos of his family of 3, sharing lighthearted stories about raising his child. Kumiko's face suddenly turned pale. She said she felt unwell and left early. A few days later, she told former classmates that she had married a businessman in Osaka and had settled in the Minato district. However, no one had ever met her husband or visited her home. When police checked Kumiko's records, they discovered that she had not been married at all in 1998. The so-called husband in Osaka was a complete fabrication. In December 1999, just 1 month after the murder, Kumiko moved from Naka Ward in Nagoya to Minato Ward, changed her mobile phone number, and switched jobs from working as a department store cashier to becoming an employee at a convenience store. This detail precisely matched Kohei's childhood description of the convenience store clerk. After that, she completely cut off contact with all of her former high school classmates. In 2000, when police first conducted a background sweep, they contacted her through the neighborhood administrative office. However, she refused to meet, claiming that she had returned to her hometown to care for her seriously ill mother, and she provided no alibi whatsoever. In 2015, after Japan's national DNA database had been established, police went directly to her home to collect a blood sample. She reacted violently, accusing them of violating her privacy, and even filed a complaint accusing the police of harassment. On March 22, 2025, Kumiko was officially listed as the #1 suspect. Her personal information was entered into a priority surveillance system, and police began covertly monitoring her movements and activities. Because Kumiko had no criminal record, her biological profile was not stored in the standard DNA database. In April 2025, police activated a newly established familial DNA comparison database, which stores genetic data from direct relatives of individuals with criminal records, specifically for solving cold cases. While extracting Kumiko's household registration and family records, police discovered that her nephew, Kenta, had had his DNA collected in October 2020, following a traffic accident involving bodily injury. On September 15th, police compared the crime scene DNA profile with the familial database. The system reported that the mitochondrial DNA segment, genetic material inherited through the maternal line, matched Kenta's at 99.9%. This meant that the killer and Kenta shared the same maternal lineage. As a result, investigators could conclude that the murderer was a female member of the Yasufuku family. On October 12th, Inspector Machimoto Takazuki, along with 2 other officers, visited Kumiko Yasufuku's apartment under the pretense of assisting with a 2023 traffic accident investigation and verifying family information. The operation was conducted with extreme secrecy, deliberately avoiding any mention of the 26-year-old murder case to prevent her from becoming alarmed. After they knocked, Kumiko Yasufuku, now 69 years old, opened the door wearing dark-colored pajamas. Upon seeing the police, her body stiffened slightly, but she did not refuse them entry. During the conversation, Inspector Machimoto noticed a long, old scar approximately 2 centimeters, about 0.8 inches, on the second knuckle of her left index finger. When police requested a buccal swab to verify a family relationship, she remained silent for about a full minute before finally asking, "Is this about the Dosun-tae case from 26 years ago?" On October 13th, the sample was delivered to the forensic laboratory at 6 p.m. On October 29th, the final comparison report was released. Kumiko Yasufuku's genetic profile was a complete match with the bloodstains from the crime scene, an evidentiary result that ruled out any possibility of coincidence. Then, at 9 a.m. on October 30th, Inspector Machimoto called Kumiko and asked her to come to the police station the following day to assist in verifying an old case. The line went silent. 2 minutes later, a clear reply came through. "I will come by myself tomorrow. There's no need to pick me up." Early the next morning, Kumiko appeared alone at the entrance of the police headquarters. She was still wearing the same dark blue coat she had worn to the 1998 class reunion, carrying an old cloth bag as she stepped inside. She proactively presented her ID to the officer on duty and said, "My name is Kumiko Yasufuku. I have come to turn myself in." Under the harsh lights of the interrogation room, she finally revealed the obsession and madness she had hidden for 26 years. After her confession was rejected in 1985, she buried her one-sided high school love deep in her heart. But the image of Satoru's happy family at the reunion reignited her bitterness. Jealousy gradually consumed her, until it transformed into an overwhelming desire for revenge. After the reunion, she began going every single day to the convenience store near Satoru's home, secretly monitoring his daily routine. In October 1999, she learned from neighbors that Namiko had just finished compiling a childcare handbook and was known for being especially helpful and kind. That gave her the perfect excuse. She would pretend to seek advice about raising a child. She found out which brand of yogurt drink Namiko liked and bought it specifically in the Nishimikawa area as a special gift. She also deliberately wore a pair of limited edition Korean sneakers, believing that even if footprints were left behind, police would assume they belonged to a foreigner. And because she moved away just 1 month later and fabricated a story about marrying and settling in Osaka, police failed to find her during the initial investigation. At 12:05 p.m. on October 13th, she knocked on the door of apartment 302. After entering and seeing the family portrait hanging on the wall, she completely lost control of her emotions. She confronted Namiko. They argued. In a moment of panic, she pulled out the fruit knife she had brought with her and stabbed Namiko. During the struggle, the blade sliced into her left hand, injuring her finger. After quickly rinsing the wound in the bathroom, she fled the apartment in haste, leaving behind her footprints and bloodstains. Kohei was sitting on the floor crying. I didn't dare look at him. At this point, she suddenly broke down in uncontrollable sobs. All these years, I've changed jobs at 3 different convenience stores, but I still dream of that child's eyes and of the blood at the apartment entrance. On November 1st, 2025, Satoru entered apartment 302 for the first time without replacing the dehumidifier packets. The family photo on the wall, the gentle smile of Namiko as she held Kohei, was still there, untouched. On the coffee table still lay the delivery notice slip left behind years earlier by the Yamato transport driver. Beside it, the box of powdered infant formula and the package of diapers remained neatly stacked, never opened. That night, NHK's program Unsolved Cases aired as scheduled. Only one small line of text had been added in the corner of the screen. The suspect was arrested on October 31st. In the footage, detectives gently peeled away the protective film at the apartment entrance. The 26-year-old bloodstain had long since oxidized into a dark, dried red, but the 24-centimeter, about 9.5-inch shoe print within it remained clearly visible. Satoru said during the broadcast, "I don't want revenge. I just don't want her to have died unjustly." After the case was finally solved, the Aichi Prefectural Police released one final statistic. Over the course of 26 years, 13 different detectives had taken charge of this case. The oldest investigator is now 81 years old. When he heard the suspect had finally been arrested, he broke down in tears right there in his hospital bed. Once again, an autumn wind swept through Dosente. The curtains of apartment 302 were finally pulled open. Sunlight poured into a room that had been sealed for decades, illuminating the unopened package and the snow-white hair of Satoru. He took out the key, gently turned it. This time, the door that closed behind him sealed away 26 long years of waiting, and the door that opened before him led to a peace that had come far too late. 26 years. Long enough for a 2-year-old child to grow into a man, to get married and start a life of his own. Long enough for a father's black hair to turn completely white, yet still return every single month to the room where his wife was murdered, just to replace the moisture-absorbing packets. While making this video, what haunted me most was not Kumiko's crime, but the image of Satoru, month after month, walking alone into apartment 302, gazing at his wife's photo on the wall, quietly doing his work, and leaving. Some people ask, what allows a person to endure for so long? I believe the answer can only be love, an unwavering loyalty to the one he lost. And what about you? If you were in Satoru's position, would you have the patience to wait 26 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. That's all for today's video.